So I'm here to just kind of leverage what Cesar was talking about in terms of adaptations in the classrooms and really talk about this a little bit from what I've been calling attention-informed education, which really takes this idea of measuring attention profiles from the clinical side of things, from the diagnosis of ADHD and the treatment of students with ADHD, to really thinking about literally every single one of us as being somewhere on that continuum of attention. And every student in your class being on the continuum of attention, and what could that mean if you knew where everyone was, and how might that change your practice? So by way of background, like I'm a virtual education OG, and so I'm always thinking about this stuff in the context of online learning, where we know that engagement and attention can be even more of a problem than in a traditional classroom. And so we have to work extra hard and be extra smart about how we build in these tactics. But I do believe that the same things can be true across every kind of classroom. So I want to talk first about the sort of like macro context for all of this stuff and some of the things that I see as sort of the mega trends in 21st century education that make this a perfect time to be thinking about attention-informed education. So all of us have spent the 21st century thinking about data in our education practice, because before that, we probably didn't have as much at our disposal, and now we have a lot. And especially if you're working in a virtual or blended school setting, you have a ton of data about how your students are doing academically and every other way. And I think educators are more and more being pushed in a good way to be smart about understanding what data is telling us and being able to use it. I think we're also at a moment that we're recognizing that academics isn't all what education is about, that every single one of us have a foundation that we need to have of social and emotional well-being and mental health in order to learn anything. And that's true for all of us. There are spikes and crises and so on, and there's some people that, the crisis is really the main event in their life, but all of us, every child, needs to have more than just their intellectual development paid attention to in an education setting. And I think, again, educators, and especially classroom teachers, suddenly have to be data scientists, and they have to be really attuned to social and emotional learning. And it's hard, but it's also, I think we would all agree, really necessary to move education where we need to be. We're also at a place where we can truly imagine a moment where we have personalized education for every kid. That certainly has been the holy grail in virtual schooling, the idea that because it's one-on-one and not 1 to 30, and we have all that data and we know how the kids learn, that we can really truly tailor their education program for them personally. And the more I think about how what we're talking about today fits in, it feels like one other tool in the toolkit, one other data point that we ought to be looking at when we talk about personalized learning for kids. So all of this was front of mind for me until I started being an advisor for neurotech. And then I realized that actually that one of the very fundamentals is attention. You can't learn anything if you don't pay attention to it. You may pay attention to it in a sideways way. You may pay attention to it in the middle of your daydream. But if you're not paying attention, you're not learning. And so that the fundamental role that attention has in education, I think, may be presumed by most educators, but hasn't been really intentionally and strategically focused on. And I think we now have an opportunity to do that in a way that we never did before. And I think one of the reasons why we can and are open to these is because of the pandemic. I've been calling it the long tail of the pandemic. I'm now going to call it the long reverb of the pandemic, because it's not a linear thing. It's waves that impact all of us and everything that we do in our own lives and in the lives of the students that we teach. There's just no doubt that we've all lived through and survived a collective trauma. And how everybody processes that is really different. But whether it was just that your school was shut down and you weren't able to see your favorite teacher for a year, or whether it was that somebody in your family died, or that your community was really racked by the disaster that was the pandemic, there's some healing that needs to be happening. And I think everyone who's working in schools is very aware that is almost job one in terms of getting kids back on track. Because the other thing that we know, and whether you call it a learning gap or lost learning or learning opportunity, however you frame it, There's a bunch of stuff that kids missed for a variety of reasons. I like to blame it on what we call the emergency remote instruction era, where it's like, okay, teacher, tomorrow you're going to teach via Zoom. Good luck, bye. And no training, no preparation, no anything else. Where those of us working in virtual schools have worked really hard not to yak away on camera and expect students to absorb. But that was kind of what it was like for the very large bulk of the population for most of 2020, most of 2021, and into 2022. So there's a lot of ground that needs to be made up academically. And the good news, if there is something good that can come from that reverb of the pandemic, is that I think we have a set of insights that are starting to emerge about how kids learn, about what it is that we're asking of educators and how do we support them in doing that really well, because guess what? They have collective trauma too that they're trying to recover from, and their priorities might be a little bit different than they were back in 2019. And so these insights together, I think, create an opportunity for us to think differently about attention and how that fits in. So there's no question we need to use every single tool at our disposal. This is a big task that we have, and it's going to last for a while. I mean, I think many of us are really inclined to say, okay, pandemic was over, we're now like in 2024, and that was in 2020. We should all just get over it already. Well, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while before we really do that. And the strategies around using attention, I think, can be a really critical piece of how we heal, how we get kids on track academically, and how we move forward in an even better, more personalized way of instruction. So in terms of harnessing the power of attention, as I was listening to Cesar talk about the adaptations that teachers need to do for kids who have diagnoses of ADHD, imagine what it would look like if you actually knew the attention profile of every kid in your class, not just the ones that have a diagnosis and may be on medication or maybe getting therapy for it, but every kid, the quiet ones, the ones you overlook, the ones who are adapting just fine and will always tell you, I'm doing just fine, every kid. So the idea that there are no more outliers, that everybody is somewhere along that continuum and in a different way for different things that they're studying. I personally zone out a little bit in math class. I will confess, because numbers and me, we don't talk to each other that well. But other things I can pay really close attention to, and I think that's true for literally every one of us. The idea of reading the room, if you were a teacher and had a profile of every kid in your class in terms of where they were on attention, you would be able to make adaptations, not just for individual kids, but for groups of kids. You know that these 5 kids need to change activities every 10 minutes or you're going to lose them. Those ones over there like to go like way hyper deep on some things. Don't stop them. Allow them to do that. How do you move through your day and move through your teaching and attune to what it is that the kids are doing in terms of attention? And then really thinking of your classroom and your school as a mesh of adaptations to really get the best out of every single learner in front of you, and frankly, all the adults in the room as well. As we were the other thing that's I think is really important about all of this is the idea of self-awareness, right? So if you have a kid who's been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, they probably know it. And they can probably tell you, my brain works differently, and they may disclose that to you or not, but they are very aware of their attention profile. I honestly think it would be a very powerful thing for every single one of us to be aware of what our attention profile is, because then we would know how to advocate for ourselves in a learning situation, how to let our instructors know how to teach us best, and how to make sure that we don't get overlooked as that quiet kid who's quietly daydreaming or not paying attention in the back of the class. I happen to be on the board of directors of a brick and mortar charter school in Brooklyn, and I was talking with them about neurotech and Moxo and this idea of attention-informed education. And one of the things that became really clear to me is that we have to tread carefully in this area when we start talking about looking at everyone's attention profile. The school leader that I was talking to happens to be an African-American male, often very probably either overdiagnosed or seen to be diagnosed with a lot of these same kind of disorders. And he happened to be, when he was a kid, diagnosed with ADHD, took Ritalin throughout his school career, and is really wary of what he feels like is pigeonholing more kids or labeling more kids. And I think that's not what we're talking about here. I think we're really normalizing the idea that everyone is someplace on the attention continuum. But as we talk to educators about that, we need to be really careful. And I was inspired a little bit by my friend Richard, who you'll hear from in a minute, about making sure that we're not over-clinicizing this approach to education. So what would attention-informed education really look like? I've been talking a lot about classroom practice, but obviously goes way, 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 way beyond that. So what if we really understood attention as we were designing curriculum? And when I say we, I mean everyone from the classroom teacher writing a lesson plan to big companies that do curriculum all the time and do those 2-minute or 5-minute or 30-minute videos. The classroom environment, how would we set it up differently if we were aware of attention and what it meant? Instructional strategies, we've talked quite a bit about that, but it's like a skill set that I could see teachers getting really excited about building, especially if they saw success. Success with kids that they might have had a hard time reaching before or had a hard time inspiring before. Data-armed teachers with this extra data set, I believe, will be in an incredible position to get the best out of their kids. And then, yeah, self-aware students, self-aware everyone. As I've been working with neurotech, I've sort of suspected that my attention isn't exactly the perfect thing that I always thought it was. I was one of those super adaptive kids, it's like the face I presented to my teachers was always like, I'm on it, no problem. But all over everywhere, and still true. May explain one of the reasons that I have a very high tolerance level for caffeine, because it's honestly just getting me back where I need to be. So it would have helped me as a learner, I think, to be aware of what my own attention profile was, and maybe allowed me to move through my education with a little bit less stress and a little bit more effectiveness. So that's kind of it for me. I'm really excited about what this can mean, especially for those of us in the online and blended learning world, because I think the opportunity there is almost limitless in terms of what we could do. And now I think we get to hear from a man who knows what he's talking about in this area.